Okay, hello. Can you hear me? Hi, Berkay. Okay, let us see. Okay, not many people are here. I hope, good morning. I hope more will be joining in. If not, uh, consider this to be a pre-warning. Okay, in my other class, I have another class of ethics uh, just before this one, and there are fewer classes in that class, and I was not happy with the attendance. And I do not like to do that. Of course not. I do not like it for myself either. But I've told you that I will be giving them a quiz next week, and I will be giving them unannounced quizzes from time to time. If attendance keeps being this way here in this class as well, I will be doing the very same thing for this class too. Because I know that this is an online class. I know that you can listen to the recordings later. Uh, but there has to be some compromise, and at least in both of our parts. Okay, of course I'm not talking to the ones who are here already. I'm talking to the ones who will be listening to the recording later. This is an ethics class, meaning that this is partly a philosophy class, which should be based on discussion. So if it gets to the point that there is not enough people here for us to have a discussion, if it gets to the point that the majority of you will be okay by not showing up at all, and hoping to listening to the recordings later, all time, every time, that will not work. Okay, you need to come to the class at least from time to time. This is what I expect from you. And if it does not happen, I will have to find ways to make that happen. And that way is the way of the quizzes. And don't get me wrong, I hate them as well, because you'll just, it will take you 5 minutes or 10 minutes to answer one. It takes me hours to read them. So I hate them more than you do. But if that is the case, that will be the only way for me to go. So consider this a warning. Okay, we are not yet there, but if next week I see the same attendance, which is not great, then we'll be going for that route. Okay, and I will be telling you that the week later we will start with the quizzes. Okay. Now, after this lovely announcement, we'll just go straightly to the point. We do not have much time. I did have a question for you. Remember, I wanted you to think of the most universalistic ethical law that you can think of. Have you thought about it? Any answers to that? No harm to children. Ah, that's a good one. Yes, usually children are considered to be innocent, right? So, uh, I think it was Maria who came up with the answer no violence. And That was unfortunately a bit open to discussion, because I've told you that in both the antiquity and in the Middle Ages, violence was not always the bad. way to go for many people. Remember your Iliad and the Odyssey, if you ever heard about them, or if you ever read them, right? We have the age of the heroes in ancient Greece and in many ancient societies as well. In many early ancient societies, was violence something bad for them? Not really. In early religions, for example, in early polytheistic religions, you see no conception of absolute good or absolute evil. They have, for example, the god of chaos almost in all cultures, and the god of chaos represents disease and bad doing and violence, of course. So and that is not something that you want in your own society, but still those gods of chaos they were not like Satan in the monotheistic religions. They were not considered to be absolutely evil. They did have temples, and people did go to the temples, especially when they were about to engage in a war, because you wanted the god of chaos on your side if you were going on to a war. You wanted to inflict violence upon others as much as you can, and that was the heroic thing to do. So it was not considered to be something ethically bad. It is much harder for us to grasp that, but that was the case. Or much recently, in the Renaissance, for example, we have this philosopher called Machiavelli. And if you ever heard his name, Machiavelli or Machiavellism, as in everyday talk, it usually has a negative connotation. It usually is used to mean a Machiavellist person is usually considered to be, is taken to be someone who is willing to do whatever it takes, including violence and including all the bad stuff, for his own private interest. Which is not the noblest thing to do, as you can imagine, right? But Machiavelli, as a philosopher, almost all historians or almost all philosophers would agree, was a completely different person. He did very much have ethical values, and yes, he was sometimes okay with the use of violence, but for a very, very good reason. At that point in time, in the Renaissance, in the 15th and the 16th centuries, all the great intellectuals of the time, including William Shakespeare, for example, or Leonardo da Vinci, or Dante, or Boccaccio, or Erasmus, right? The dude who has given his name to your programs. He was a philosopher, by the way, and essay writer. Uh, all those people uh, did have one aim, one target, and that was to put an end to the constant warfare that had been going on for almost 10 centuries. The Middle Ages was famous for its constant warfare because it was the time of the landlords. We call them derebeyleri in Turkish. And all those big landlords had their own armies. That was the economic and political system, and it was so very normal for them. They thought that God had created the universe like that, and it was the natural way to go, and it was the fair way to go as well. And there was nothing fair in it, actually, because those landlords had utmost authority over their land. There was no standard or law. They could punish any subject of theirs whenever they wanted, in whatever form they wanted. They could do whatever they want. And they did exploit very much so. At the very same time, as they all had their own armies, the war kept going on because they kept trying to get more land from each other, and there were alliances formed and dissolved at all times. You can think of them as like different mafia families waging war on each other all the time, and people kept dying in their wars, and people kept dying, or kept living very near to starvation under their rule. So all those intellectuals, all those great minds of the time were trying to put an end to it. And Machiavelli, who is considered to be the founder of political science, by the way, universally, uh, was of the opinion that there was only one way to go for that to be possible, and that was to support an absolute monarchy, because they hoped that the absolute monarch, if there was to rise an absolute monarch, if one person had that kind of support, then he would have the power to disband the army of the landlords. And there was no other way, because you could not just simply go to the landlords and ask them to please kindly stop waging this kind of warfare, or stop kindly to give up their privileges and their way of ruling. They would not listen to you, of course not. And you could not go to the people at that point either, because there were peasant revolts all the time, but they were doomed from the very start. It was almost impossible for those revolts to be successful, because there was one landlordship over some corner, another landlordship over another corner. These were not, that close by, and the peasants could not revolt together, because that system bonded the peasants to the land, meaning that they did not have the right to leave the land. There was death penalty to it. So they could not organize within themselves, and they could not have this one big revolt that would have the power to overthrow the landlords. What they could do was to revolt in their own landlordship, and the overwhelming majority of those types of revolts were unsuccessful, because they did not have arms. The peasants were not given arms. Once again, the punishment would be death penalty. So what they had was the tools that they used for agriculture, a rake, for example, or an axe. And they would wage war with those kind of tools against the armed men of the landlords, which did not give them the upper hand, as you can imagine. And usually all those kind of revolts were unsuccessful. And even when very rarely one of them would be successful, uh, it did not last long. What would happen? Imagine that you are a peasant and you revolt. You are successful, meaning, unfortunately, that the landlord and his family would be killed, because they have inflicted such pain for such a long time. So they would either escape, or most probably be killed. And the remaining peasants would form a commune. A commune was think of a village that everything is run collectively and peacefully, and everything is distributed equally. Think of the Smurfs, right? The cartoons. Da, 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 da. Anyway, it is similar to that. And a commune would be formed, which was great, of course. After all that pain, that was something to hold on to, right? Not really, because they did not live long. Why not? Because all the landlords nearby, that were probably waging war onto each other at that time, uh, would immediately cease fire in between themselves, would come together, go crush that commune, uh, kill everybody probably, or enslave some, and then go back to their own infighting. Why so? Because they could not afford to have a commune nearby, because that would be a center of attraction, at least ideologically, right? Nobody would want to live under a rule of exploitation, very heavy taxes, constant warfare, when there are people living peacefully and equally nearby. So they could not afford to have a society like that nearby. They would have to show that it was impossible to have something like that. So going to the people was not the answer at that time. Going to the landlords would never be an answer. So that left the people at Renaissance one possible solution that was to support the rise of a monarch. And these people were not stupid, the Shakespeares, the Erasmuses, and the Leonardo da Vinci's, Copernicus and Galileo, right? Great minds, all of them. And they were not stupid. They knew that that absolute monarch would be the problem himself, given enough time. But for the moment, they needed such a figure because that would be the only possible power that would dismantle, that would disband, that would take away the armies of these landlords, right? So Machiavelli was okay with the use of violence in this case. If there were to be an absolute monarch, if it and if he was to decide on disbanding the armies of the landlords, if some of the landlords would oppose, which they would, of course, uh, if they were to oppose, then Machiavelli was okay, and many of those intellectuals of the time was okay with the use of violence of the absolute monarch towards the landlords, because they believed that it would eventually cause less pain to the majority of the people. So there are circumstances, and there has been historical eras, and quite long ones, by the way, in which not all violence was condemned, even praised. So no violence, unfortunately, is not or has not been a universal good. You can say no violence for no reason. That would be okay, right? Because in all human societies, as far as we know, no violence for no good reason has been considered to be something good. Or the example that Berkay has given to us, no harm to children, once again, can be taken to be an example of an ethical good. Yes, of course, there has been circumstances that harming some children, specifically children from royalty, the king's children in many cases, that has seen to be something, interestingly enough, even sometimes ethically good, because if there's a monarch that has been very bad to his own people, let us say, and if you are trying to overthrow monarchy, and we saw that during the time of the bourgeois revolutions, like the French Revolution, for example. During the French Revolution, the children of Louis was executed as well. It was seen as an inevitable step, because even if you take away the king, if you leave the child behind, there is always the chance that the pro aristocracy or pro monarchy folk, the people that support the monarchy and the old regime, would always have their hopes, because the dynasties, as you know, are continue within the family, within the blood, and they would see that very child to be the very next monarch, and they would pledge loyalty to him, even if he was very small and didn't really understand what was going on. He would immediately become a symbol, and for the majority of the people, he would be the spearhead of much exploitation. So we do have many instances in history that the child of the monarch was executed as well. And even though, executing a child was seen to be ethically bad and something to be ashamed of, and as a political step, it would be seen by the majority in some cases, or at least by some portion of the society, to be an ethical good, because it is for the good of the majority. So it is really hard to find examples that are really universalist, that are really universal. Sorry, but again, no harm to children is quite a good one, and you probably can have no harm to people for no reason at all, uh, could as a universal ethical good. Apart from that, it would be very hard. So let us briefly talk about relativism in general, because having had this discussion on universalism, even though we can find some universal laws or values, we can also see that there is not much that would leave us with cultural, at least cultural relativism for at least some aspects of ethics, and it is really hard to deny that there is cultural relativism when it comes to ethics, because if you know your history, if you have any idea on history actually, you can easily give many examples to that. The other class we were talking about, for example, the ancient Greece. um, you can have any practice actually, but we were talking about married women not being allowed to watch the Olympic Games, for example. That was um, considered to be ethically corrupt, because they did not want the married women to watch half naked or fully naked athletic men, because that led the way to seduction. And today, with today's ethical point of view, we can say that it is a double standard, right? Or we can, of course, say it is very much patriarchal. And but let us leave our own point of view for a moment. Let us just, try to compare and contrast the semi-nomadic societies, or earlier Greek societies, with later Greek societies. We can easily see that things were completely different. If you ever have seen TV shows like The Vikings or The Barbarians, you can see in semi-nomadic societies, women are or can be at least warriors or chiefs. They do take part in public life very much so, and you do not see that in later ancient societies like ancient Greece, but it was the same in the Mesopotamian civilization, or the Egyptian civilization, or any civilization that you would have. Things changed dramatically for women, and the ethical codes changed dramatically with that as well. Um, the Another example, another similar example, by the way, in once again ancient Greece, only women from royalty or prostitutes were allowed to participate in classes in the philosophy schools like the Academia of Plato or Lyceum by Aristotle. The reason was that there had come a very rigid patriarchy, and it was about the rise of private property, interestingly enough. Before the rise of private property, there was what we call to be communal property, meaning that everything belonged to the community itself, not to individuals. And that gave us a classless society. At the very same time, there was no inheritance problem. And inheritance problem is miras sorunu, right? Inheriting your goods, what you have, to the other generation, to your children, right? If you have communal property, there is no inheritance problem because there is nothing to inherit. But when you have something to inherit, especially for the upper classes, and in an agrarian society, we are talking about land, and land meant everything. Um, they would have to uh, it was very important for them, let us say, to know who their children were. And that might sound strange to you, because who doesn't know who their children are? Well, in the semi-nomadic societies, or in the earlier ancient societies, there was polygamy. Polygamy means having more than one sexual partner. That was completely okay in those societies, and that wasn't ethically wrong at all. That was how things went. So uh, it was the case that you wouldn't be sometimes sure who the father was, right? And with the private property, that became a problem, because when you are going to inherit a great deal of land, you do want to know who your children are. And so we see at one point the transition from polygamy to monogamy, right? But if you are going to have monogamy, then you have to have very strict rules, and you see a change in ethics, a very sharp turn, by the way. Adultery becomes a crime all of a sudden. I mean, all of a sudden is a couple of centuries, by the way. Of course, these kind of changes does not happen overnight. Adultery is having sexual affairs with someone that is not your husband, right? And that's a thing in monogamy, not in polygamy, because in polygamy it is okay to have sex with whoever you want, right? So it's not a crime, it's not a ethical wrong. There is no conception of adultery in polygamous societies, but in monogamy, adultery became a crime, and it became one of the severest crimes, by the way, and especially if it was the woman that did adultery or that was accused of adultery. There were very, very harsh punishments. They would put that woman on a stick and kill her that way. So you see the whole ethical atmosphere changing when it came to the gender roles. And so within the same framework, women were taken from participation to public life, and that was why they were not given the right to have an education as well. Because if you have education, then you will be taking part in public life. That's for sure, right? So as time went on, women became not to be considered to be citizens. They did not have the right to have property. They were considered to be property themselves. Their husbands could do whatever they wanted with them. Again, you see this crime of adultery, and that was why, by the way, the married women were not let into watching the Olympic Games, or that was why it was okay for the prostitutes and the royal women only to have any kind of education. For the prostitutes, that was because it did not matter whether they did have sex with the man there or not, because even if they were to get pregnant, it would not matter, because nobody was expected to inherit their lands to the child that came from the prostitute. That was considered to be an illegitimate child, and nothing would be left to him. So it didn't matter. And as for the royal women, well, class difference when it began became more important than gender difference, meaning that a woman from royalty, a woman with noble blood, as they would call it, um, would be considered to be superior to a common man. And if the husband of that noble woman and the father of that noble woman would die, then the woman would be expected to run its property, her properties. And so she was expected to have some kind of education. It is true that they usually did not go to public schools. They were given private lessons, but we do have rare instances in which they were interested to have those classes, and they were let to have it. But apart from that, no common woman could go there and have any kind of education. So leaving aside our own modern point of view, when you compare and contrast the earlier ancient societies and the ancient societies that came after the start of agriculture and settled life and the rise of private property, you do see that there are completely different ethical laws, right? And you see it all the time in later periods as well. For example, we have a time in which the heroes, the young warriors, were very much respected, and they could even challenge the kings. You see examples of that in the Iliad, in Homer, for example, Achilles challenging Agamemnon, the king, and being successful at it, by the way. And then we have other periods of time in which it would be impossible even to think that any so-called warrior could ever imagine challenging the king. So the understanding and the ethical values would be completely different. Another example that we talked about was the Romeo and Juliet, the play written by William Shakespeare, right? That was in the Renaissance, by the way, the time of Machiavelli, right? Well, Romeo and Juliet was not first written by William Shakespeare. We have two different versions of Romeo and Juliet. Of course, the beautiful one is the Shakespearean one. That's the one that matters most. But for the purposes of the study of ethics, the other one is important as well, especially the comparison is important. The first one was written towards late Middle Ages. It is written with a feudal understanding, and the second one is written from a humanist perspective. Humanism was an intellectual movement during the Renaissance. A new world was being shaped. The city culture was changing everything. So the way they saw things and their ethical understanding as well was completely different. How so? Let us go over the story quickly. The Romeo and Juliet story is quite well known, right? These are two young ones who fell in love with each other, but they are star-crossed level lovers. They cannot get together because they come from families that are in feud, meaning that they each come from noble families that wage war onto each other. And that had been waging war onto each other for a very long time. And saying these are noble families are at the same time saying that these are landlords that we had been talking about, right? So they both have their own armies and all that, and this kind of war is part of the constant warfare that we have been talking about, and it is causing deaths of many. And the feudal understanding was in feudalism in the Middle Ages, the core ethical value, the most important ethical value was loyalty. Loyalty to your landlord, loyalty to the church, loyalty to your father, loyalty to your family. That meant everything. And if you did not do that, you were not considered to be an honorable member of society. And Romeo and Juliet are expected to be loyal to their families. That means they are expected to be loyal to the feud as well. But these are young ones. They fall in love. They get secretly married, by the way. And they have a plan. They will be running away and live happily ever after elsewhere, because they could not live happily ever after in that city with that code of ethics. So that's the plan, but that does not work because as Romeo is going back to his house just after he has gotten married, secretly married, by the way, he comes across Tybalt, the cousin of Juliet. Now, and he has two friends by himself. That is a problem because the ethical code of the Middle Ages at that point, given the circumstances, makes him compelled to have this fight to death with Tybalt, because he has to be loyal to his family, he has to be loyal to the feud, and he has to have this fight to death. At the very same time, nobody knows, but he has gotten married to Juliet. That makes Tybalt and him kin. That makes them from the same family, even though no one knows about it. So another ethical code says, of course, you cannot harm any member of your family. So we have an ethical dilemma and we'll be talking about ethical dilemmas very much. So, what is the right thing to do? Either you'll be loyal to the family and, pick up the sword and, get into this fight to death, and you will be right to do that because of the first ethical code. But in the end, you'll either be killed or kill Tibalt, and that would be an ethical wrong because he is a member of your family, of your extended family now. So that's a problem. So Romeo does not want to engage in fight, and his friends think he's shying away the fight. He is afraid, and that's the most shameful thing to do. And they do not want to see their friend in such a shameful position. So Mercutio, one very close friend, takes up the sword himself and enters the fight on behalf of Romeo. He's defending his honor, and Romeo tries to stop them because he wants nobody to be harmed, and that gives him trying to stop the fight gives Tybalt the opening to um, use his sword effectively and kill Mercutio. So now Mercutio is dead, defending Romeo's honor, and now Romeo has no chance but to avenge the death of his friends. Now that makes three ethical codes in conflict. The first one, the loyalty to Romeo's own family, Romeo's core family, compels him to fight. Uh, the expectation to avenge his friend compels him to fight as well. So now two ethical codes are compelling him to fight. And on the contrary, you have another ethical code, Tibalt being part of the extended family by his marriage, is causing still a conflict, but now he has more reasons to fight and he cannot help but fight. So he kills Tybalt, and at that point the prince comes along, and the prince, we know from the very start of the family of the story that the prince is not happy with all the fighting going on, and he's trying to that the prince is the figure that will become the absolute monarch later, by the way. But anyway, the prince had told everyone in the city that he would not be tolerating these feuds, these feudal fights, and he had told earlier that if ever someone is to fight, is to have that kind of fight, they would be punished by death penalty. So now, by his own orders, he has to punish Romeo. He has to execute him. But he's very fond of Romeo, so he cannot bring himself to give that order. So he expels Romeo. So Romeo is expelled from the city. So Juliet and Romeo sending messages to each other, try to devise another plan, and Juliet comes up with one. And it's a very intricate plan. They have this medicine. Juliet is going to drink that medicine, which will send her to sleep. She'll fall asleep, but it will look as if she's dead. So her family, thinking she's dead, will take her body to the church for the funeral, and Romeo will sneak into the city at night to meet with Juliet at the church, and Juliet will wake up and they will run away once again. That's the plan. The problem is that the message do not get to Romeo, so Romeo does not learn about the plan. Juliet drinks the medicine, falls asleep. The family does think, her family does think that she's dead. They are, of course, so very sorry for what they had done, for all the feud and for all the pain that they had caused. But it is too late, right? So they take the body of their daughter to the church, and Romeo does hear that Juliet is dead, so he sneaks into the city to pay respects to the body of Juliet. And when he comes, Juliet is not awakened yet. and Romeo thinks she's dead as well. So he's very young. He's so very in love. He says he cannot go on without her. So he kills himself. He pulls out his dagger and stabs himself and kills himself. And at that point, Juliet awakes and sees Romeo's dead body, and she understands what has gone on, and she says that she will not be able to go on without him either. So she kills herself as well. Tragic end, right? And it's a tragedy. In the Shakespearean version, uh, up to that point, the two stories overlap. The two stories are the same, the earlier version and the later version, the feudal version and the Renaissance version. But from that point on, the very last ending is different, and it makes all the difference, and it gives us an understanding of the two respective ethical worlds. In the Shakespearean version, the two families come to their senses with the loss of their children. They see for the first time of how senseless their fighting had been, causing all those deaths throughout the years, and they swear not to have any feud going onwards. And it's of course the whole work is very critical of the feudal understanding of ethics and their understanding of loyalty and honor and all that. In the feudal version, the author sticks to the old ethical idea. He praises the ethical values of loyalty and honor, understood in the medieval sense. So in his work, yes, it is a very tragic thing that these two young ones have died, but it is their fault. It is their fault not to have listened to their families. It is their fault not to have been loyal to their families. And that is what happens. The message is that that is what happens when you have no loyalty to your family. So those two ethical understandings are completely different. So from all these examples, we can easily say that it is very obvious that there is some cultural relativism, right? Temporal and cultural relativism, meaning that ethical values and ethical laws change from one culture to another, change from one time to another, and that we call cultural relativism. Please write this down. Cultural relativism. But that's not the only type of relativism, right? It is almost impossible to deny that at least some part of ethics is culturally relative. But there's another relativistic school which says that we have to understand relativism not only from a cultural point of view, but also from an individual point of view, and that we call individual relativism. And it simply means that ethical understandings do change from one person to another. That is more than saying they change from one culture to another. Individual relativists say that ethical values, what is right and what is wrong, do change from one person to another. Now, of course, they are partly right because not always it is the case that everyone is on the same page on what is right and what is wrong. That's very true. At the very same time, individual relativism, if it is to be recognized by everybody, imagine a society in which that everyone is individual relativists, meaning that everyone recognizes that it is normal that everyone has their own understanding on what is right and what is wrong, and that is okay. Would people be free in that type of society? Everybody, my question is to you. Yes, it would be chaotic. Thank you. Once again, it's Berkay. And I want others to join in as well. Okay? Are you aware what the question is? Sorunun farkında mıyız arkadaşlar? Uyuyanlar. Okay, here it comes once more. But I expect you to listen to the course as well, okay? We talked about individual relativism. Imagine you are living in a society in which everybody is an individual relativist. Would you be free in such a society? In a way, that is the utmost freedom, right? Because everybody is free to think whatever he wants, and everybody is free as a result to do whatever he wants. So, would that kind of absolute freedom bring freedom itself? Okay, let me tell you this. I am leaving you with this question, okay, whether you listen to it or not. And I will be asking the same question at the beginning of our next class. And if we do not have good enough answers, then I'll go for the quiz once again. You can imagine that I'm not happy doing this, but it isn't enough to show up. You have to be here mentally as well, right? For us to have any decent discussion. So I will not be writing you a mail about this, because you are expected to listen to this and you are expected to be mentally here as well. We'll just proceed with this question next time we meet. Okay? Any questions? Okay. I'll see you next week then. Bye bye. Teşekkürler Berkay.